Okay, I'm sharing my screen. So once you are able to see my screen, just let me know. Yeah. So please, anyone can confirm. Are you able to see my screen? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So as I mentioned, right, the basic idea of this particular workshop is so we are going to be covering the fundamental are we called foundations of web development. Okay, so why? Because if you choose any language or any component, ultimately you will part of this development work only. Like as a developer, I can say that. So after completion of your graduation or even in the next semester, you may work on internship or you may work on major project, right? So that all belongs to the development of application. So that development, what internally it includes foundational concepts which we require to understand, and what are the tools and technologies generally available to develop the web applications. So that all we'll discuss briefly, and later on one of the basic fundamental component required for any web page development is called HTML5. That also will be covered as part of this workshop. Okay, and now as I mentioned, the first part we will go with the introduction. So today I'm going to be like taking a kind concept on like architecture of the client server. We called simply, or we called it is a MVC or MVT architecture. So or else web application architecture, whatever we called it is. So we we are going to be covering today. So how the application or the web application works in the real time. Okay, so if you consider a simple example, okay, so here today we are going covering how the client server architecture will be, okay, or we called it is a in Java we called it is MVC, or in Python it is we called it is a MVC, but all talks about the same thing, okay. So that is what I'm telling now. So let's consider a simple example, Google only, okay. So now let's take example. I want to search for, let's take same course name, foundations of web development. I just want to search in the Google, okay. So now first what we are doing, first we will open the client, right? So www dot, let's take google.com, okay, google.inlist otherwise, okay. So first we are opening the google.com, okay, google.com we opened, and the google.com is giving a for search bar because Google is the search engine, so it's only will do the search. It doesn't do any kind of orders or nothing. But if you go for Flipkart, you can search the product, you can add to cart, that also will be there. But as for the Google example, so this is the website where user can search something on the Google, you know, right? So let's take example. I'm typing same thing, foundations of web development. Okay, let's take web development. Okay, so now I want to see some kind of tutorials over here. So now when I'm typing here, the Google, what it will do, immediately the keywords whatever you given here, let's take foundations of web development. With respect to these keywords, what are the top ranked websites are there in the market? Okay, top ranked means commonly repeatedly searched websites. So that are filtered and will shown here. If you see that this is the one website, this is another website. Likewise, he given top 10 over here if you see here, and remaining they given page relation 1 2 3 like this, you know, right? So here what is my point over here is how the request is going now and how the response means how that particular output came into the screen. So that is what we are talking about, client server architecture, or we call MVC architecture, whatever we call. Okay, so that how it is happening, and each place what are the different technologies or what are the different tools are supporting to perform these operations. So that is what I'm talking today. Okay, so definitely it will be easy to understand, but I will also cover some of the terminology or foundations concepts while we are covering this concept also. Okay, so till this point, any doubts or any questions you can ask me. Otherwise, I will go continue the remaining part. Any doubt as of now? All good? Is it my voice clearly audible to you people? Can anyone confirm? Are you there? Anybody? You can ping me in chat, or you can speak up also. You can unmute and speak. Okay, I'm taking as no. Fine. So now, as I mentioned, right, the same whatever we give in the example, we'll explain orally here so that you can easily understand. Okay. Okay. So let's consider first, when we open any website or any application, it might be Facebook or Flipkart or Amazon or bookmyshow.com or whatever that, first we will search the URL, right? When we type the URL, first you are able to see a screen on the system or browser, right? So that is what the first part generally we have. Okay, you see here, let's consider this is your mission. Okay, so now, sorry. Okay. One second. Okay. So let's consider first one. We have our monitor. Okay. To open any website, we require one monitor. Okay. So in this monitor only, you are able to search the component. Okay. So let's consider here a user wants to get a data for his requirement. Let's take in the same example. Let's take myself. Okay. So I want to myself Satish. Okay. Okay. So myself Satish wants to get some data from the internet. Let's take example. I want to search the foundations of web development. Okay. So now I open my laptop. Okay. So immediately in my laptop, what I will do, if I want to do or search anything in the internet, you know, right? First we have to open the browser. Okay. So first part we have to open the browser. This is the browser like Chrome or Firefox, whatever it is. Okay. So now we have to type the URL here. Okay, like the www dot or something google.co, we type it, right? So now whenever we type that one, immediately the content will flow into this browser called Google, right? So now we got the Google, okay, with search bar. Okay, this is the search bar. Assume that. Now when I entered some content and when I click on enter or OK button, now immediately you got an output call from this. Okay, directly you got an output. Internally what is happening, we are not sure. But externally, when I'm hitting the screen on the OK button in the Google search bar, immediately I'm getting some results. Let's take website 1, okay, and website 2. So likewise, you got top 10 websites over here and along with page nation. Okay, so this is what your output. Again, the same page is pasted on our mission and now user able to see the same output. Okay, so this is the outline architecture what now just before we saw on the Chrome browser with Google. Okay, but when user triggered this request and when it is giving this output to the user, it is what internal happening that we need to understand now. Okay, so first, whenever we open a website, I mean to say whenever we open first the screen, you got it right, search bar you got right. So that each page, like here one web page and here another page, right, these are all technically called as web pages. Okay, what we call web pages. Okay, so now to design these web pages, whatever you are able to see in the screens, in the output screens. Okay, so these are we call technically web pages. Okay, what we call these are web page. Okay, so now these web page, whatever we are able to see here, that are generated by using some technology. Okay, so now when we write collection of these website web pages more and more, like example here in this case 2 web pages we saw. but when we click on this link, another web page will open. When we click on other link, it will open another link. Likewise, it is when we are developing or when we are planning for developing a web application, so indirectly what it means, it is a collection of web pages. Okay, so when you collectively write a number of web pages together to perform a particular action, so we called it is a web application or website. Okay, so web application, website, both are same, but only a thin line difference is there. Website will only contain static web pages. Static means it cannot do any interaction. Like if you see in your, on our case, Google search, it is interactive. When the user given input, it giving output. But some websites, example, news channels are there, so you can only listen or you can only watch the news. You cannot do some modifications on that. So such kind of websites we called static web pages. Okay, but in general, whenever we go in real time, more all what we are looking like Flipkart or Amazon, these are all we call web applications, because these are our webs. These are mostly intended to some interactions. Okay, and also, like one of the best example I will tell you, banking. So banking also we call web application. It's an application, so where user can use that application to serve some services. Similarly, our like Java T Point or W3 schools, Wikipedia, these are all we call websites, because these are mostly used for giving the service or information to the user. So it's not like product based something, it's only for serving the data to the customers. So likewise, we may have in generally two types of components, websites or web application, but all together technically called as collection of web pages. Okay, so these web pages to develop in the real time, the fundamental language in any framework or any architecture, the fundamental language we are using is HTML basically. Okay, so we are using HTML. So HTML is the foundational language or web application, web language we call. So hypertext markup language we call. So technically it is the core language to develop the web page first of all. So if you want to develop a web page which can render on the, which can open in the browser, so whatever the Chrome or Firefox, so these are we call browsers basically. Okay, we open the browsers, right? So these browsers, whatever the pages you are able to see, so that's we call web pages as I mentioned. But to develop this web page, the only option we have in the world is called HTML. That's why it's a very common, simple, but very powerful language to develop the web pages. But HTML can only develop the black and white web pages. Okay, like whatever you are able to see here, likewise. But if you want to give a color to this particular web page, so if you want to give some style to the web page, or if you want to give some animation to the web page, we have a technology called CSS here. Okay, so CSS will help you to design or to decorate the web page. So HTML will help you to create a web page with simple architecture or simple template. But if you want to give the proper coloring and styles and animations, then we will use the CSS. So CSS will help us to design a web page such a way that it should attract the user. It should be more eye contactable. I can say that it will give you more user experience. You know, right? Only black and white does not give more interaction to the customer. So we have to add some effects or some links or some menus. Such kind of things can be developed by CSS. But CSS is a native language, means it's a kind of group of attributes which we can frame to generate a button or to generate a menu or to generate some style. Okay, but as we know, we are more digitalized. So to the extent that CSS, they given a framework called Bootstrap. Okay, so Bootstrap is a framework which will help you to design the websites in simpler manner. That means whatever the code which we are writing manually in the CSS, the same code which is already available in the Bootstrap. Let's take example. If you want to style a button in the CSS, you should write at least 5 to 6 lines of code. But whereas in Bootstrap, by single one line, we can accomplish or we can achieve that goal. So that's why Bootstrap is more powerful. But internally, Bootstrap consuming the CSS. Okay. So now by this, I hope you understand first one, HTML, which is used to create the static web pages. CSS, which is used for styles. Okay, so this is for static web page. That means web page creation, I can say that. And these two for styles. Okay, these two for styles when you go for CSS and Bootstrap. Now third thing in the front end, Java JS, or we call technically JavaScript or JS. Okay, so JavaScript is a client-side scripting language. Why we call client-side? Because still we are at the browser. So browser is called generally client, because it will only trigger the request to the server. So it is called client, and it will send the request to the server. So request means, you know, right? So whatever the input we are sending, in our case, we type the word called foundations of web development, right? That is we call input. So that input, whatever we are sending to the server, that is we call generally request, and the request will trigger by the client machine, that is our laptops, basically our browsers. Okay, so our browsers itself is acting as a client, and whatever the input you are sending or clicking on the buttons, that is we call request. So mostly these requests are going in the form of HTTP protocol. So HTTPS or HTTP, only different secure layer, but the ultimate foundational protocol is HTTP protocol. So HTTP protocol used to send a web data or web page from one place to another place. Assume that I want to send some X data from my laptop to Facebook server, or my data to some Flipkart server. Then this HTTP protocol will help you to transfer the data from one place to another place through using IP address. Okay, so that is how this data is, or this servers are communicating with the clients, basically. Okay, and whatever the code we are writing here to display this logic, or by using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, whatever the code we are writing, so that is technically called as client side or presentation logic. Okay, because this all the logic will be used for presentation, means look and feel, or to display to the customer. So that's why we call it as a presentation logic. Okay, and now in this, the only content can be created by using HTML, and the colors can be driven by the CSS. And now if you want to do any kind of minor operations, okay, minor client operations, any operations, example, which will be validations, form validations, or it will be like some kind of calculation, like if I'm entering the date of birth, age should be calculated, or if I'm entering the from date to date, the number of days should be calculated, or if I'm entering some kind of auto completes. So if you click on the drop down should show the options to select, like, so such all options we can develop by using JavaScript, basically. So JavaScript is a foundational and very powerful client-side scripting, and based on this only all client-side applications will execute it in the browsers. Okay, so JavaScript is itself a powerful language to parse your code also, because without JavaScript we can't run in the client also. So JavaScript will help you to perform any kind of client-side logics. So that's why based on this JavaScript, I mean that in the market, so many libraries are came into the market. Like example, very traditional one is jQuery. Okay, and after that you may had this words Angular JS. Okay, and now we may have this React JS. Okay, and we have Node.js. Okay, we have Backbone JS. So many types of what we can say that JavaScript modules or JavaScript libraries came into the market. These are all JavaScript frameworks. Okay, so these are all will help us to develop the client-side applications or client-side frameworks. So that's why if you want to work as a designer, I mean, they would say front-end developer, or we called React developer or designer. So that for all that we will generally use this particular technology only. So these are all whatever I wrote here. These are all front-end tech. We call simply front-end technologies. But the only limitation of these technologies, these cannot be communicate with the database directly. So because security reasons, because of data privacy reasons, so these all technologies cannot communicate directly with the database. Okay, so these are all front-end technologies, and these are all front-end technologies like web development technologies we called, or what we can say that web application technologies or web designing technologies, whatever we call. So same like these are all front-end technologies which will help you to create a dynamic and colorful web application or web pages. Okay, and when you talk about this part, like say this is coding part, right, like basic coding, but before this also, how it looks like, who tells us like, okay, here search bar should be there, and if you see in our case only, see for example here two cards came, okay, here some content will be here, two buttons are coming, and who will tell this way to design like this only? For example, if you know the HTML, yes, we can develop like this, okay, but this card should be here only, why not here, or why not left side, or why not in the top of the screen? So this placement or these color combinations, so who will guide that? So that generally guided by UX developer or UX designer, okay. So UX designer will first design the screen how it looks like, okay. So after that this code, this implementation will start generally, okay. So to this underneath, I mean that the background work will done by the generally UX team, okay. We call the UX team. So mostly UX team will use Photoshops, okay, and Canvas and Figma. So these are all different tools, SketchUp. So these are all different tools to draw the things. It's not for coding; it's only drawing. Simple way I can tell you. So they will give you SketchUps how it looks like. They will give the sketch just like this one. A rough sketch they will give you. So based on that, the front end developer will design the skeleton screen or web page, we call it. Okay. So first, the word will start with generally we called in general word prototype or template. So this is generally done by the UX team, and from where, okay, from the prototype generally will happen this web page designing, okay. So that is all about our web pages or website development, okay. Now website designing, and as I mentioned, whatever the data we have or whatever the like credentials or username password or the product information or the data which we are bringing back to the user screen, so that all will be generally stored in the database, okay. So in back end there is a database, okay. So that database will responsible for storing all your data. Like for this only example, if you speak of like MySQL, okay, Oracle, and Postgres. So these are all different databases which are DB2. Okay, so these are all different databases which are help us to store our data into the tabular format where our data will be persistent. That means it will be permanently stored. So whenever you want to get the data back to the screen or back to the user, assume that in Facebook you posted some data. In future also you can able to see the data back, right? So that is the way the data once stored persistently, whenever you require or wherever you require, you can retrieve the data, and also you can change the format of the data and you can display to the customers. So that is the how this data handling is I mean to say the data handling in the database side. So for this, the common language we used is SQL. So for any database which we have in the market, so commonly we use a language called SQL language. We use it generally. Okay, so SQL will help you to retrieve the data, similarly to store the data and also to update the data. So whatever the operation you want to perform on the database, it may be insertion, deletion, updation, retrieval. So the common language we used called SQL. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, to get this data, whatever we have in the backend. So let's take example. In this database table, we have some records. Let's like three records are there, two records are there. Okay. So if I want to get the data back to this particular web page, okay, back to this particular screen. Okay. So now to get the data, we required someone to handle, because this client side logic or client side technologies what we have in the market like React or Angular or jQuery, JavaScript or HTML. So these technologies directly cannot communicate with this database. So there should be one person to interact with this particular front end and back end. So this is we call, as I mentioned, front end, and this is we call back end. So middle layer we require. This middle layer only we technically called as business logic. Okay. So this business logic or core logic we also called core logic, core logic, or another word we call web services. Okay, so these are all technically a different word, but the meaning same thing. So these will help you to communicate from our front end. I mean to say our presentation logic to, I mean to say, our HTML or whatever the code we written to database. And similarly, the database, whatever the data will fetch back to retrieve back to the customer. So this communication always takes part using this intermediate logic or business logic or core logic. Okay, so for development, this business logic or core logic only, we use different technologies as we aware the very powerful language, you know, right? Java, we can use Python, we can use .NET, we can use PHP, we can use Ruby. So there are so many languages, you know, right? So we can use Perl. So these are all different languages which will support to write the business logics. Again, as similar to front end, these are core languages. But on top of core languages, we have frameworks with respect to each language. Like example, if you go for Java, we have advanced Java and we have Spring Boot, Hibernate, like that. Python, Flask, and Django frameworks are there. .NET, MVC is there, and ASP.NET is there, and PHP Gen framework, Ruby on Rails are there. So likewise, we have so many frameworks which are top up on the language which we developed to simplify our coding. Why framework is required? Why? What is the significance of framework means? Basically, the core language, the fundamental language, if you are using directly, you require to write more and more code to get your response. But when you are using the framework, it is giving or it is providing a required support or required libraries or required architecture to simplify your logic. That means if you want to write a logic in core language, if it is taking 100 lines of code, if you are using the framework, it hardly complete the same logic within 10 to 20 lines. So that major difference we have framework to core language. But in the framework, again, we will write the core language. There is no doubt at all. But still, with using frameworks will simplify your daily work format. Okay, so that's why we are generally using the framework every using frameworks. But this is the major part where you developers will involve, or the crucial part where we are writing the logic. That means the basic fundamental logic will be here. It is usually used to send the request and display the response. So whatever the user giving the input, it will collect the input and send to the server. This is we call server basically now. Okay, and now whatever the server again getting the data from the database and send to it, again it will recreate the web page and display in the required format. So that is how the front end will work. So let's consider a simple example. If you go with Flipkart only, okay, very simple example I'm taking. Okay, so let's consider I'm taking a Flipkart website. Okay. So now in this case, whatever the first screen you are able to see here in this monitor, so this is we call a static or web pages. We call these are web pages and front end web pages, because these web pages can view by or can operate by the customers like as you and me. So this is we call website. Okay. But if you see here, the data what you are able to see here, like maybe this menu, or if you scroll down, let's take example. I will tell you simple example over here. Yeah, here if you consider this one only, best of electronics, you are able to see, right? So here some image is coming, some text is, then grab now button is there, similarly something is there. Okay, this data is coming from the database. Okay, so the data which is thrown or which is returned by the server, that is Flipkart server. Okay, so there they return the core logic like Python or Java. But once we got the data, like once we got the image URL, or once we got this particular text from the backend, now this CSS or JavaScript or this HTML will convert the data into this usable format. Now user can able to see this data in a user extraction format, so that they can click on it or they can view the details simply, instead of just by reading the data by the data. Like example, you know, right? Instead of reading a big paragraph, we are more likely towards to the table format. Instead of table format, even more we are attracting toward the charts format, that's graphical format. That's the human tendency. Similarly, whatever the data in raw format we are getting from the database, now we make them as a more attractive and user friendly format, and we showcasing as a web page. So that is how the web page came into the picture. Okay, now by this web page, let's take example. If I'm clicking on login on example, I'm telling, let's take sign up. Okay, so when you click on sign up, it will show some form like enter mobile number, right? So the looks like you are new here something. This design will develop by front end developer, and this looking, that means how the blue color should here, the orange color should be here, this design will give you by the UX team. And now whenever you entered your mobile number, when you click on continue, what it will happen, immediately your mobile number will get on one OTP, right? So that will done by the backend user, backend, I mean it's a backend developer. So likewise, every time whenever you are building any application, three layers will be involved: front end layer, middle end, and back end. Front end will be designing, mostly talks about designing, and back end will mostly talks about storage. That means database, like it may be relational database or an unstructured database. Relational means we have Oracle, MySQL, these are all. Unrelational means MongoDB, Cassandra, these are all. So different database we have in the market, based on the requirement or based on the situation we may use it. But commonly, fundamentally, we use a language called SQL language. Okay, and in between, to communicate from database to front end or the designing part, generally we'll use this particular component called core languages. That is what the need of learning the any programming language. So even C++, nowadays most of the people are not using, but olden days we used C and C++ only as a core language. So likewise, if you do some work or background on the some particular project or application development, any one program language is required in our career or in our profile basically. Okay, so this is how the data flow is going from one area to another area, or one application to another application basically. Okay, so here we will talk about some few terminology over here, but before going to that, so if anyone have any doubts, please ping in the chat, or you can ask me orally also, before going to the a few more terminology understanding. Any doubts as of now? Okay, perfect. So now in this architecture, we may understand some of the terms. The first one, basically we commonly used a term called client server. So client means whatever the mission is sending a request is called client. It may be desktop, it may be your mobile, or it may be laptop, anything. Whichever is sending the request, I mean to say, in whichever the mission you're clicking on the button or you're entering some data, that is technically called as client mission. And in that client mission, to access the internet or to access your web page or to access your website, we required a software called browser. Okay, it's called Chrome or Firefox or Edge, any browser is required. That's why we called it as a client software, client mission. Okay, so now similarly, where the code we deployed, or where is the our returned code is posted or placed. Example, we return some Java logic. So where, in which mission you place that mission we called as server. So in another word, the mission which will accept the request and process your request and send the response, that mission we called as a server. So it might be Flipkart or whatever it is. It is also a computer like you and me, but only difference, that is a supercomputer. That's a huge hard disk will be there, huge RAM will be there, huge processor will be there. That's the only difference. But the machine which will accept your request and process your request. Example, you said I want only mobiles. Let's take example in this case only. Okay, in our case only here, I want only, let's take example, MI brand products only. Assume that I click it. Okay, so now what, see the server what immediately did that, if you see, it reflected and returned all the MI products here, if you see that. So this is how the server will react. And now when I click on the server, take as a request my request as a MI, and the server will send all the products from the database with respect to MI. Okay, and after I'm getting the data from the database, now the HTML, the CSS, it designed in such a way that you can able to see the product name and product cost and discount easily. So this is how the design will works. Okay, how design will impact your business. Anyway, you know, right? See how internally you are doesn't matter, how you looks like is more matters in the real time, right? Similarly, how much effectively you designed a logic, similarly that in such a great effectively you have to design the website also, because the people will attract towards the look and feel only rather than the core logic what you written. Okay, and coming to the terminology what we are speaking, so whatever the input we are giving called request, and who is giving the request is called client, and whatever the data we are getting from the server, this data we are getting from server, so this is we call response from the server, and who is sending, that is with that machine we call server machine. Okay, and this communication, this client and server communication always takes place with the help of a protocol called HTTP. Okay, what is the protocol? HTTP. So if I'm writing some terminology, first I covered client. Okay, and then we covered request, and then server. Okay, and then response, and then protocol called HTTP protocol. So HTTP protocol is used to transfer the your web pages from one place to another place, or to move the data from one place to another place. So this is all about your HTTP protocol. Okay, and now another word we used, database. So database will help us to store your data into the persistent manner. I mean to say some storage. So whenever you want to store some data permanently, and whenever you want to get back that in future references, so we may use the word called database basically. Okay, and after that we use a word called web page. So web page means the page or the interface what you are looking on the web, or you can say that browsers, or the web page which can only render on the web browsers basically. So these web pages are basically two types: static web page and dynamic web page. Static means which can only use it to render the data, display the data. You cannot do any interactions over on the screen. But when you talks about web dynamic, it can interact with the user. Example, so whatever you are able to see on the screen, so these are all called dynamic. See, you can perform the price filters, or you can click on this link, or you can add to compare. So these are many operations you can perform on the screen. But if you take example Wikipedia, I can take. Okay, so if you open Wikipedia, it's only for reading purpose. You cannot do any operations over here. See, whatever the data we here, let's take example, I'm typing HTML over here. Okay, so let's take, I'm entering the HTML, just a simple example. Now you see, now you can able to see the data, whatever the with respect to HTML you are getting the data, you can able to see. So these kind of data display sites we call generally what we can say that static web pages. Okay, when we go for dynamic means the same thing, if you can able to interact, then we called it as a dynamic web pages. Okay, and the collection of either it may be static or dynamic. Okay, the collection of web pages we call generally website. If it is general purpose website specific to only one intention, that means let's take example Flipkart is for e-commerce. When you go for SB online, it's for banking. So specific to one action, we called it as a web application. Okay, and so we have here client-side technologies and server-side technologies, and as well as database-related technologies. So these are all together will construct a website or web application. Okay, that means if you want to learn a complete end-to-end development, we have to learn all these areas. So if you learn all these areas, we call that role is called full stack developer. So full stack developer means the person who can manage the front end and middle end, back end. But if you're only specialized in the front end, then we called it as a front end developer or React developer or Angular developer generally. Similarly, if you're only middle end, then we called it as a Java developer or Python developer or only back end developer. And similarly, if you're working with only developer, associate data engineer, or we called database architect, or we called database associate. So such kind of roles will be associated with the database. But if you do all together at one place, then we called it as full stack development. And on top of all these areas, if you speak of front end or middle end or back end, there is a common terminology we have testing. So whenever there is a development or designing happens, there should be one person to verify that work is correct or not. So that means the whatever we developed or whatever we created, is it right, correctly created, or is it as expected developed or not? We have to check every time, or we have to review that, or we have to validate that. So for that, one role will be there, that is role only tester or testing. So tester will help us to certify that whatever developer developed, is it right, as expected developed or not, or as per client requirement is developed or not. So that is all together we called it as a testing basically. Okay, so testing will involve all areas, all three areas. It may be front end or middle end or back end. Okay, so this is all about your web application development or application development architecture. So that's why as a fresher, it is always good to have the full stack, so that you may sustain any place of the world. And similarly, if you have the all core languages, I mean that all three areas, you can able to completely develop a application without dependence on other person. Like example, you only have the front end, so you need to depend on some back end develop. But if you have the knowledge in all three areas, you can also develop your own website or application independently by collectively all these three technologies. Okay, so that is how this client server architecture or the application development goes on the real time. Okay, so anyway, as I mentioned, right, so this is only foundationals, but after foundation you may choose whether you will go for Java side or Python side or PHP, whatever the technology. But front end back end is common for everybody. Okay, only the middle layer will be varied from interest, but front end back end mostly is common for everybody. Okay, so this is all about an introduction session for your foundations. So still, if you have any questions or anything, you can ask me. Otherwise, for today we are good to close the session. So but before wind of the class, any questions or any suggestions, or if is it going good or understandable, so please you can talk, or you can ping me in the chat so that I can improve for the next class. Anything like you can post in the chart your feedback. So how it is, like is it understandable or is not understandable, so that I will ask to anyone can speak up or can tell your feedback or any questions till now. So whatever the concepts we covered till now, so if you have any questions, please ask me. And as I mentioned, so these introduction classes will be for 3 to 4 days will be there, and after that we'll start the HTML5, the core, the fundamental language for creating the web pages. Okay, perfect then. Okay, have a great rest of the day. Bye bye. Tomorrow we'll meet by same time, 10 o'clock. Okay, please join by and inform to your friends. I saw very few people joined. Okay, so please inform to your friends to join the class. It might helpful for your understanding in the next classes. Okay, bye bye. Take care.